This podcast is brought to you by JAM, Junction Arts and Media, building community in the Upper Valley through media.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Going to Dismas. Today I have Burlington Dismas Resident Rich, Volunteer for Peace Marie, and longtime House Director Kim. I guess let's just go around the table real quick, introduce who you are and just your role at the house.
My name's Rich. I've been at the Dismas house for almost 2 years. I really don't have a role at the house. It's like a family environment. It's been very great for me, you know. The first year I was there, I really didn't apply myself too much, but Kim noticed it and kind of got on me and smartened me up. And ever since then, I got back on track and things have been going very positive ever since. She knows how to do the hard love thing.
That's right. Tough love.
Tough love, yeah.
All right, Marie.
So I'm Marie. I've been living at the Dismas house for about 3 months now. And so I'm a volunteer, and my role is to kind of build relationships with the residents at the house, build trust, and then set up activities as well outside and in the house, at the house. I also give a hand with some of the office work and organizing and helping out with daily chores and yeah.
They make you do chores?
Yeah.
What's your chore?
Well, I'm also living there as a kind of a resident, so it's only logical that I also have my tasks and my chores. So I'm doing the stairs and hallways.
Wow. And I'm sure you do an excellent job.
I try to.
I don't think the Hartford stairs and hallways has been vacuumed in 7 years, so it's
Marie's
improvement.
been a great addition to the house. I've been hearing for about 1.5 years how Kim, kept saying how a woman in the house, she missed it, because they add something to the house. And I was always like, But since Marie's been there, I've seen it, She's like brought us closer together, and she's great.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. What's it like for you being a female in this house?
I didn't feel uncomfortable at all, actually. Since I arrived, I felt safe straight away because Kim and Haley, who is the assistant director, they told me that if I had any issues, I could come to them and talk to them about anything at all. It made me feel very comfortable and safe. So I knew that I had support, and if anything happened, if I didn't feel at the right place, then I should just go to them. But it didn't happen. I felt very welcomed, and the guys made it easy for me to make that place my own, kind of my home away from home. And yeah, they just made sure I was settling in okay, and if I needed anything, I knew I could count on them. So
yeah, and I visited a few weeks ago, and when I was leaving, you guys were all hanging out in the living room, you and all the residents. I was like, this is what it's about. It's so cool. Just everybody, just one community, one family. We're all driving towards the same thing.
Marie's made it more like that, though. It wasn't quite as tight-knit before she got there.
yeah, I didn't know.
She's added to that.
Before,
You've definitely added to that.
Yeah, we are hanging out even casually. We don't have to like knock on people's doors and be like, hey guys, come hang out. It just happens naturally. So
Right. I mean, it had no like feeling of you're the staff spy to make sure everything's going okay in this house. You're very much a part of the residential community. And Kim, what would you say about it? You've been in Dismas forever. You've seen it with and without Volunteers for Peace. What's the contribution?
I've always been really excited about having students and Volunteers for Peace. The first Dismas house was started by a group of students as well. And I think the diversity, over the years I've seen when we have international volunteers, even more so than traditional students. I think part of that is because international volunteers arrive so excited to kind of be a part of community, and students tend to be, their time is taken up with classes. But I think they're both incredible additions to the community. And on a day-to-day basis, I think I see the biggest change, for ways that we can impact community when we have that kind of diversity. I also think, having women in the house as well. When I interviewed Marie, we were a couple of years into COVID, so we had lost our last student and international volunteer, and we weren't, we didn't know when it would be over, so we weren't able to do any recruiting. So I let her know you could be the only woman there, with 8 or 9 men. And, and we talked about that. In the past, we've usually had a couple of women, sometimes 3 women at a time. But, she still decided to, accept. She's been able to, she does movie nights. People have joined in activities that we've tried to do in the past and they don't join in. I think there's just right now an incredible sense of community. And I don't know, as a social experiment, how that works or why that works. But I do, I have seen over the years having any kind of diversity, whether it's, women or students, people come from different walks of life. And it's not that students are role models, and that, we are trying to help former prisoners become like students, but it's just both have very different experiences to share and kind of, it breathes life into community, kind of that sharing of them. I'll never forget years ago, we had this feisty woman from, I believe she was from Spain. I got there one Saturday morning to pick something up at the office, and she's knocking on everyone's doors at like 8 a.m, and people don't get up at 8 a.m. on weekends. And she's like, come on, in her heavy accent, we're going to the hospital. And I thought, what's going on? And one of the guys had a procedure. And typically the guys do not visit each other at the hospital for something that's that, kind of simple. And he would have been home in 2 days. And I thought, yeah, fat chance. Nobody's getting out of bed to, go see Dwight at the hospital. And, I'm down in the office and then I hear the door shutting several times and people kind of troop by the window and off they were to the hospital. And it just really struck me, there's some, dynamic that's just changes, when you have diversity in the house like that. And it's always been really positive.
Yeah, and I think on a much smaller scale, the community dinners, it's the same reasoning to have other people with other experiences come into the house and share stories and talk and just mingle. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I've never experienced anything quite like it. The kindness and how the volunteers go out of their way every day of the week, every month, and for years and years, and I was kind of taken back by it.
It's kind of a shock to the system, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, you care about like what's going on in my life?
Yeah, I'm a convict,
Right.
So I'm used to having that title or stigma, and but I've never been treated any different than just a normal person, and it's been life-changing.
And does this help you change like how you perceive yourself? I mean, you label yourself just now as a convict, but this has to, fade over time.
I grew up in a very traumatic family environment, and I was abused and treated like shit all my life. And to be treated with kindness from perfect strangers is just, it does change you. It gives you a different view on stuff, and it's changed me by experiencing it. Yeah.
Marie, what was your thought process coming into this house? I don't know if you apply specifically for this field, but I mean, obviously you came in knowing that everybody came from jail that live here. What was your thought process walking into this? The first time walking into this house,
I've never been scared at all. I've got great support from staff members, Kim and Haley, the assistant director, and the guys have been super supportive as well. So I never felt insecure or like I wasn't safe, and I knew I was going to be the only woman in the house, but I trusted everybody right away, and I was prepared and I was ready to take this on. And also I think being trained as a social worker helps me a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a big part of it, yeah.
And just being a helpful resource for the residents at the house.
So what would you say to somebody considering volunteering or even living at the house like you? Because, this is a lot of what we do with our outreach efforts, Kim. You try to invite people in the house, and they're going to walk in with the idea, I'm walking to a house of criminals, because they are, but that's not end of story. There's so much more to talk about. What would you say to the person who's reluctant to come in and to be a part of this community?
Well, maybe to just start with dinner. Maybe you can meet people over dinner, and you don't have to stay afterwards, but just maybe hear their stories, talk to them human to human. It's okay. I mean, we're all, I think unconsciously we all carry stereotypes with us because that's the way, society brings us up.
Yeah, there's lower class, middle class.
Yeah, I don't think it's uncommon to, through all of our each life experiences, to have, this little preconception of what I'm walking into, the world around me right now. What's the high risk? What's the low risk? How do I assess the world around me?
And that's okay, because we need that as humans to go around in our relationships and in the world. But if you talk to people and you don't look at them as, oh, they're ex-convicts and they've done this or that. Maybe, we've all made mistakes. So, of course, maybe they've done some things that were motivated by bad choices or poor choices. They're no less humans, so you talk to them and you hear from them, and I think it's very enriching. And once you get past the stereotype, it's very beautiful what can happen.
Now, I have a very naive question. What language do they speak in Belgium?
I'm French speaking. That's that's my mother language. But we actually have 3 official languages, so French, Dutch, and German.
And you speak all of them?
I don't speak German.
No.
I do speak Dutch. I mean, I get by. I'm not perfectly bilingual, but yeah. I've worked in Brussels, and Brussels is bilingual. It's a bilingual region. So if you want to get a job in Brussels, you usually have to be bilingual.
All right, so how do you say in French, Rich, you are not a convict?
I don't know.
All right, Kim, can you go a little bit about this Volunteer for Peace? What's been the experience of Dismas and specifically you at Dismas?
I think the International Volunteer Program, and Marie can talk a little bit about the counterpart, but these days any of us can go anywhere we want in the world and volunteer. And I think a lot of today's travelers are really looking for more than an experience where they will be a tourist, kind of looking from the outside in. The difference is when you volunteer internationally, you usually become a part of a community, like Marie's a part of, the Dismas community. And so there are opportunities all over the world. You can work with, animals or children or adults. And I think it's not just young folks that are getting out of college that are doing this. There are people who have retired. You can do long-term, 3 to 6 months, probably longer than that. And Vermont has a counterpart, just like, Brussels would have an agency. Vermont has an organization called Volunteers for Peace. And they're wonderful, and they pass people on to us. We have, advertised. Dismas House in Vermont has advertised, so they will pass along applications, and then we interview folks and, just try to make sure their English is good enough to, so that we can understand them and they can understand us. And I think their motivation in the old days, we had our first volunteers about 15 to 20 years ago. I'm looking at Marie because she just worked on a project where she kind of cataloged all those. I think that, people's motivation could be, to work on their English, because just speaking English in some countries, helps you find a job. I think today more and more it's really to not be a typical tourist, but to, gain some experience, but also to be a part of a community. Again, we have middle-aged, we've had folks that have retired come and join the community, but typically it tends to be people just out of college.
When you get an application from a Volunteer for Peace, what does the interview process look like? Like, what are you looking for?
So we've always kind of taken, pride in interviewing everyone the same way. So that means former prisoner, student, international volunteer, and we usually do a Zoom interview. But a part of that is talking about Dismas House, talking about what the position would be, which, the primary purpose is really to be, there in community and supporting people getting out of prison. And that can be just taking time out of your day, to listen to someone who's having a bad day or to hear their story. It can also be helping out in the office, and there are a lot of different roles. But then we also ask them, how did you grow up? Who's important in your life? What do you like to do? Kind of a short history, just to try to get people talking, about themselves, because you're inviting them, just as you are when you're interviewing someone in jail, to come and join this community.
Is this your first time to the United States?
Yeah, it's my first time.
So what was the most surprising part of your experience so far? What didn't you expect?
I had this kind of cliche in my head of people carrying guns around and stuff.
No, that's Texas.
Vermont hasn't been like that at all, thankfully. I feel very safe here. And it's very rural. So Burlington is the biggest town in Vermont, and it still feels very, very small townish, because obviously I've been living in Brussels for the past 3 years, and it's the capital city of Belgium. It's huge. So the vibe is very different. But I've been struck with how friendly people are. Kim was surprised when I told her that, because apparently Vermonters are a bit cold.
Well, I think we're
Be standoffish.
We're very loyal, but it's not like down south where people immediately are warm. There's just, differences.
Yeah, I think New England has its own little vibe going on.
Yeah, we're very loyal, but, it takes a little bit of time.
I felt struck right away by, how kind and friendly people are. Bus drivers, it will be like helping me with directions, obviously looking lost or asking how much the fare is, but the buses are free in Burlington, so I just like that.
Is there anything that you want to accomplish before you leave this country?
Yes, I want to travel around. What I'm going to do, I'm going south and then west after I'm done with the project at Dismas House. So I just want to see different places and meet other people. And like Kim said, maybe in the south, I'm gonna see how warm people can be, and I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, Vermonters are definitely not that friendly.
Do you have other engagements set up? Are you volunteering elsewhere?
I'm going to Argentina after the States, and I'm going to work on a farm as a woofer. So woofing is a program that allows people to join in on a farm and just help farmers with their daily work. Mm-hmm. And so I got accepted it's more like a ranch close to Buenos Aires. So I'm going to be there for 2 weeks helping with gardening and taking care of the land in general. I've never done it, so it's going to be my first time, but it looks like the owner doesn't need people to be experienced, so I'm going to learn a lot, and I'm also going to improve my Spanish, hopefully.
I mean, this is fascinating for me to listen to. I can't think of a more enriching way to live your life. Rich, have you traveled much in your life?
Yeah. My dad was in the military, so I moved around the United States a lot.
So Marie's heading south and west. What would you tell her to expect? Have you been in these areas?
Yeah, I agree with Kim. Vermonters are a little standoffish unless they know somebody that knows you, or it's they'll be
or you
nice
come with
to
a maple syrup peace offering.
Yeah. The South, the food's better. I just always like traveling because you drive 8 hours northwest or south and people talk different. The food's different. It's a variety.
Yeah, and I vacation kind of how you describe. I just like to drive aimlessly and experience the community, hang out there for a couple days. I don't particularly like tourist destinations. I think that's the best way to experience a country in a new area. How good is a true Belgian waffle?
The best Belgian waffle is the Liège waffle. They're made in my hometown. They are round shaped and they are very thick. There's a cinnamon kind of powder added to the batter, and there are big chunks of sugar inside. So, and they are crispy on top. They're the most delicious thing. We have a different type of waffles in Brussels. They are good too, but they are a bit boring compared to the other ones.
Why was waffles part of the Belgian culture? Like, how did that come to be? Do you know?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. I've known them my whole life. It's just, but there are waffles in the Netherlands as well, and culturally we're kind of cousins. So I don't know if it came from the Netherlands in the first place or if we invented them. And there are different kinds of like recipes and variations of the original waffle. I don't even know what the original waffle is, but and there's argument and there's conflict between Liège waffle and Brussels waffle.
Also, French fries.
And French fries, yeah. You don't say French fries, you should say Belgian fries, because we invented them.
Do you say Belgian fries?
I just say frites, because that's the way we say it in French. But yeah, I hear people saying French fries all the time, because that's how you call them here. But yeah, the French stole that from us.
Oh, man. We'll have to unpack that later.
She always corrects us when we say French fries. No Belgian fries.
Kim, what food would you say is indicative of the United States? Pizza, burgers,
pizza,
heart attacks.
Yeah.
Pizza is Italian, Kim.
Yeah. But it feels like all of our stuff is started someplace else. Yeah. Down south, it'll be that'll be a change. A lot of ribs and barbecue and lots of butter on everything. And
Where specifically down south are you going?
Atlanta, Georgia, and Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Oh, that's not too bad. All right, Kim, we kind of went over this before. You had volunteered abroad, or
I didn't volunteer. I worked I was in Central America. I was first covering the Contra Sandinista scuffle. I was a photojournalist, and I ended up doing a piece for a reporter from the Boston Globe, and we were in the refugee camps. And that was my first exposure to refugee camps, coming from Vermont. And it was pretty revealing. There would be thousands, like maybe a couple thousand people in kind of these tent cities. I ended up later working for the UN with refugees specifically, and it was mostly Salvadoran and Guatemalan and Nicaraguan refugees. And I just found something really compelling in the refugee camps. There were all of the regular agencies that you hear about kind of providing for the refugees, but there was something behind the scenes that went on that, just really caught my attention. And there might be a grandmother who had lost her entire family during the war, or the military stuff was going on in El Salvador then. So there were, kids who didn't have parents. And there was just a way that the refugee community took care of each other. It's like that grandmother was swept up into someone else's family. It wasn't that she was given a new ID by the UN and, she was housed elsewhere, but there was something going on. And you also would hear about, soldiers trying to come in the camps at night and take kind of young kids to become, they were, rebel soldiers or guerrilla soldiers, to take kids away to fight. And, they came up with some solution that, when anyone came in the camp, you'd be surrounded by hundreds of kids just, ringed around you. And there was sort of these safety things that I never really knew the full extent of. But, those were all kind of the inner workings. That wasn't protocol that, the UN had set up, but basically, refugee families kind of taking care of themselves and each other. There was such a sense of community, even when people are down out, they've lost all their possessions, they've lost family members. And I don't think it fully clicked until I moved back home and got a job with Dismas House. Before then, we weren't all talking about community all the time like we do now. But I think the force of that kind of hit me at Dismas House. And quite often, when times are challenging and you see people in the house taking care of each other.
So you would say that experience translates fairly well to the Dismas experience in terms of creating community and the importance of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What inspired you to I didn't grow up like that. That wasn't like a value in my home. I would never have dreamed of going abroad to help others. What kind of inspired you to go down that path?
I think, growing up in a small town in Vermont, I really can relate to some of the volunteers. I never wanted the typical Club Med vacation or Disney vacation. I mean, those are probably fun and needed, but I always wanted to be a part of a different culture, especially traditional cultures. So I've lived in mostly developing countries. I haven't been to Europe, but, I've been to Thailand and Central and South America and Australia, which is not a developing country. But I think that there's something, you pull away all of the, we have so much, our kids want Xboxes and phones and stuff like that, all of this extra stuff that I really enjoy traveling in countries where, there is a lot of poverty and there are things going on, but there are just these glimpses of, there are families together, there are grandchildren taking care of their grandparents, and there's still something of value there. And just, learning what I can from that.
Yeah, it resonates deeply with my experience of traveling and volunteer experience.
Rich, could you see yourself doing something like this, going abroad and just really becoming a part of another community?
Yeah.
It's really anxiety-inducing for me to think about. I don't know if I could do it.
Well, it helps to make a difference. This second year that I've been at Dismas, I've been more involved with the other guys that live there. And the better I do and the more I help someone else out or can, be an encouragement or a positive just by example, it helps me. So, yeah, I would definitely be all about doing something like that.
So if you were to choose, money's no obstacle, you have 3 months to go visit another culture, what would you like to experience?
Good question.
And Kim, put your thinking cap on because I'm going to ask you the same thing.
I would like to go to Mexico.
Really? Why?
Just because I live down south and there's so many of them coming here, I would like to go see why, and see if I could, help out.
In Cancun or Mexico City?
It doesn't matter.
No, I think it's very interesting.
Where I'm needed, where they need some help.
Maria, have you been other places, like doing something like this? Or is this the first
yes,
time?
I've been a volunteer on a few short-term projects in Europe, Asia, Hong Kong, Tanzania, Africa, East Africa. So yeah, I've been involved with the community over there. But I think it's very different to stay for a longer period of time because you get more involved and I think the experience becomes more real as well. And you've got more time to dig deeper into the issues that the people you're working with are struggling with. It's a more enriching experience when you get to stay longer, if you can.
Right. Your professional background, you said that you're a social worker?
Yes, I just graduated in September 2022. I've been working for 10 years before, but not as a social worker, obviously. I was working for the National Rail Company. Back home, I was a ticket clerk. Oh. And I got bored of that job, so I went back to school at 27. And hopefully from now on, I get to do what I'm passionate about.
Isn't that fun to think about, though? You just kind of pause your life and start fresh with something new. I wish I could do that sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely brave. For sure.
Maybe it's brave, but also I was privileged to not having any big constraints. Is that a word? Constraints. Like not having kids helped. So I was still, working and I kept my daily job. But yeah, I took some time to go back to school on Thursday evening and on Saturday as well. So all my weekends were taken. I only got Sunday off for 4 years. So I guess maybe, I was brave to make that sacrifice, even though I don't like that word. But I just think I needed to do that. Otherwise I would have been very depressed with my life. I felt alienated and I felt Like, I needed to blossom and I didn't know how. So it was worth it.
Yeah, I find it all fascinating. It certainly takes like a leap of faith to jump into something like that. How did you learn English? Is it in school? Just
in school, and also because I was watching TV shows in my room when I was a teenager. I was spending a lot of time in my room watching British television.
Really?
And that's how I picked it up, I guess.
I'll tell you, I took 7 years of Spanish in school, and I retained almost none of it.
Oh, if you don't practice, it's not going to stick.
Yeah, right. So you're doing great. So, Kim, you have a 3-month getaway to anywhere to experience another culture. Where would you like to go?
Africa.
Oh.
Also, Southeast Asia. I'd love to go back, and Vietnam, and just some areas like that. I've been to Central and South America a lot. I'd love to go back there. I feel like Europe when I'm older because, that there just are a lot of areas that socioeconomically are similar to the U.S. And so right now I'm interested in areas that are not like the U.S.
And what about Africa, intrigues you? Why Africa?
I think that there are so many sort of microcultures within, different areas of Africa. I'm always interested in textiles. I do spinning, weaving, felting. So Marie and I were just talking about that. So usually countries I choose there are still people practicing those kind of arts.
All right, Rich. I find that a lot of times residents of Dismas House feel that they didn't have a lot of voice growing up and to be able to say who they are. What do you want people to know about you?
I'm just trying to make a way for myself. I've really never dealt with my past. So every 5 to 6 or 7 years, a relationship will go bad or I'll do something stupid and I end up having to start over again. And Dismas House has just given me the family environment that, that's been a positive instead of a chaotic roller coaster ride. And it also gives you the space to be able to not have all the issues of bills and this and that weighing on you. You can actually deal with, your emotional issues and you have a support system. I didn't really use it a lot the first year I was there, but I have this second year, and it's been a 180.
Right, and I think that's something that's unique to Dismas. We don't rush anybody along in terms of sober housing. Finding a 90-day program's good, but be able to stay somewhere safe for 2 years. Do you really feel like you had a chance to grow?
Yeah, I didn't really take advantage of it until this last year because I was just still so stuck on dwelling on the bad things and the regrets and this and that and really not focused on, that's the past. You can't do anything about it. You need to focus on your future, the present.
And that's not an easy thing to do for anybody.
No, it's not. I mean, it's still a challenge. I mean, I'm 48 years old and I have a ton of regrets, but I know I'm a good person and I want to do the right things. It's just I tend to self-sabotage and I don't know, having the support system, when I leave Dismas House, I will still always feel a part of it and I will always go back and keep in contact with the house and the guys that I've grown close with. And I never felt like doing that before. Usually when I moved on, I just moved on.
So, Kim, listening to Rich talk, you have much more experience than me, or my experience has been that most of the residents I've worked with certainly have traumas in their life, and that having the space to grow, like you were talking about, has been the key. Is that true for you, too, over the years? How's the population evolved?
I'm not sure I understand your question exactly.
My experience has been at the Hartford House that most of the residents have underlying traumas that they're growing from. Has that been your experience also?
Yeah, and we never talked about it. I mean, we, kind of my generation, which, I kind of am older than everyone here, but trauma was never a word that was used in the early days, that just didn't exist. And I think, what Rich is talking about, we do ask people to make a minimum commitment of 3 months living at Dismas House, because it's not supposed to be like a shelter where you wake up with a different roommate every day. We're trying to build community, and that takes time. But since the pandemic, what I've really seen is people staying longer, often it taking, 6 months or a year for people to kind of, maybe it's partly letting defenses down and being open to relationships with other people in the house, and to start to feel good about themselves, like they actually have something to offer. And often it's when you see people starting to offer other people help. People get out of jail with no clothes, and, here, buddy, I've got sneakers, and people will, get someone going again. That's kind of a sign that, they've kind of moved to this new place. And I've really noticed that more with longer stays. People might get going again in 3 months and move on. But in the last couple of years, with people staying longer periods of time, I've noticed this transition. And I think when people start feeling better about themselves, they feel like they have something to offer other people. Richard does a lot of public speaking, and he'll often bring up that, Dismas wasn't like this social science experiment. Like, if you add this and this, you create, you fix human beings. It's something much more complex. And I think what I see, happening at Dismas is people starting to believe in themselves again. They get out full of hopes, and, they might be really up, and I'm going to get a job this quickly and do this. And it takes much longer. And then there's a period where you're disappointed in yourself, probably because it didn't happen quite like that. And then this kind of slow building up, I can do this. And really I feel like other people's acceptance in the house and their support often means just as much, if not more, than the staff support. We're a part of the community, but I feel like there's a way that people care for each other in the house. When you have a healthy community that transcends, it kind of wraps you in this, kind of protective coating where you can sort of go out and meet the world.
Yeah, that's another big thing with Dismas. They give chances when someone fails or screws up. If they are sincere about, yes, I know I was wrong, and, I've seen Kim give second, third chances to people. And it's like, I'm used to once, twice, third, you're out, but I'm just and it works. It really does. Like, guys will screw up, and I think sometimes just to test the system or something. But Dismas is a very forgiving place. As long as you're putting an honest effort and being sincere with yourself, they're willing to work with you, and that's another thing that is very rare.
My experience at Dismas has been a lot of residents will do well through a few months or so, and then at some point, it's almost like people get uncomfortable with the success that's currently going on around them, and they'll self-implode or self-sabotage. Kim, has this been your experience too?
So much of it is about, addictions. And I think that how, at least in the U.S., where things have changed a lot in the 32 years, it's not, we don't look at it so much like someone screwed up anymore. It's a disease. You wouldn't get mad at someone for, having a heart attack. I think that's been really healthy. I think that as long as, there are people who come in and, write off, they're not interested in being there. That happens sometimes too. And so there are a few commitments you make to live at Dismas House, to be a part of our evening meal, house meetings, to participate in these group activities. So, folks like that won't stick around that long. But there are people who have been there, have a lot of ownership, and they relapse. And I think now, the message, and I think it's a much healthier one, is not you wronged your community. I think that a lot of people and families think of it that way. You wouldn't have done this if you valued, your family. If you're a parent and you have a son or a daughter who's struggling with that. And I think, the message is we want to support you yeah, you can't stay here and just continue to use. We care about you. We want you to be safe and help to get people into treatment. And I think, there are people who have done that and gone on to do, really well in the house. And I think it's changed their stay because there's so many years of, and that probably creates its own trauma of like, you used, you're out of here, you broke a rule.
Like you just said, yeah.
That's kind of the old days, that. And I think at least in Vermont, and Marie had an interesting thing to, mention about programs in Belgium or lack thereof. But I think that in Vermont, there's this growing awareness around that. And certainly, I've seen my own family struggle, and that really helps because I know, there are some really strong, good people in my family. Some who have, struggled and kind of come out the other side, but some who haven't.
Marie, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? What's been your experience with addiction management?
I haven't had prior experience with people using and people struggling with addiction in the work I was doing back home. But what Kim just said about caring enough and supporting people even if they make mistakes, I've seen it, I've witnessed it as a volunteer living at Dismas House, and I'm really convinced that this approach will give the better results. Because, in my country, in Belgium, we do have transitional houses, but very few of them, so it doesn't give many options to people who want to get their life back on track. And so usually people getting out of jail, they will end up on the streets. It's much harder for them to get back on track when they end up on the streets, because then they might get help from associations, non-profits, but again, those are not funded by the government for the work they're doing with former prisoners. And so it's not enough because there's a lot of demands. There are lots of people who need help, and they don't get access to the help that they need.
So, and Kim, you might know some of this too. So what's the jail system like in other countries as it compares to the United States?
Well, it's interesting. Again, Maria and I were talking about, I don't know if it's Norway or what country, but there are some countries that are small enough and have created, so I've heard in some of the trainings I've done about these, this incredible women's facility where they're taking college classes and it looks like a college campus, and then, the other side says, yeah, but that's a really small country and that works there. But, in the U.S., it wouldn't. So I know that, there are a lot of systems that are being talked about. The U.S. is so large. I know Vermont is pretty progressive and studied some of these other projects. And just as a side note, we actually had a volunteer from, I can't remember which Scandinavian country, but she went back and started a Dismas House type program.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
She used to
That's
come
cool.
back, every year and visit. She hasn't been back now for about 5 years or so. But that was, I don't know if it was just really basic. It could have been opening up some type of sober house, or it could be that, it really was a NGO and, it got large. But I feel like we should look into that again. But she was just so kind of impressed by something, so basic. But then when it's there, you realize how much it's lacking. In some ways, Dismas should be the way our families were, or our families should be the way Dismas is. But, a lot of people say, well, actually, we didn't eat dinner together, or we didn't do things together, or it was pretty dysfunctional. But there are, really what the kind of community Dismas is. There's something so basic but true about it.
And I think when you get the basics and you start from there, you start again, or you start over, it's much easier to see long term or to have perspectives on how you want your life to be from there on.
Good foundation.
Rich, did you come to Dismas straight from jail?
Yeah.
So how has your perception of what you understood Dismas to be changed from the day you arrived?
I thought it was a halfway house, just,
Right, which is a common
which I've
misconception.
been through before, and it's nothing like a halfway house. It's more like it's your house, and you become a part of a family,
What's a traditional halfway house like?
You have, rules. If you break them, you're out. You got to go to programming. Just very structured.
Yeah, you have to like sign in, sign out.
Oh yeah, can only for the first 2 or 3 weeks you can't even leave. Until you earn your privileges.
Your privileges, yeah.
It was rough. Because I was still on parole, and I was young on my first time. I was 26, 27 when I went to my first halfway house. I was still fighting the system, fighting authority, and this and that. So they would call my parole officer every now and then and threaten me with going back to prison. So that would calm me down. And
what would you say is the balance for you to be successful? What's the balance between structure and accountability and freedom to make your own choices?
That is the difference. You have the freedom to make your own choices. And for the first year, I had that space, but I wasn't putting it to the best ways that I could be using it. And it just took me some time. I had a lot of depression and regrets, and all that was going through my head. I'm doing this again at 48, da-da-da-da-da. Just gives you the space and the time.
Was there a moment where you just kind of said, let's try something different? Like, this just is not working for me.
After I was there a year, I was faced with possibly having to move out, and I was going through the whole regret thing again. I've been here a year and I haven't done this, I haven't done that. And so I was like, well, I'm going to make the most of what little time I have left here. And, just doing that, I think when you're doing the right things, people see it, and doors open for you. And I was able to stay there longer, and I've made the most of it. And I'm just grateful for that, because I'm a different person this year than I was last year, for sure.
If you could get a message to a younger version of yourself a year ago, what would you say? What could you say to yourself?
Stop living in the past. Live in the present.
Yeah, small steps, right? Marie, do you think a Dismas house could be sustained in Belgium or other countries? Is there a need for something like this?
Well, there's definitely a need. I think it would be difficult to make it happen in Belgium at the moment, because our system, it's such a small country, but our system is kind of complicated with different regions with their own government, and so every region decides what to do and how to do it and what to do with the funding they receive. So I would think it would be kind of difficult to agree on something global to put in place. But I mean, such a small country is maybe has a great scale for such a project, but yeah, we need more funding, we need more social workers, and we definitely need more social work inside the prison, social support inside the prison, because even if there are transitional houses available for when people get out, if they aren't prepared, it's going to be much more of a struggle for them to start over, even if they have a place to go home.
Yeah, I think a lot of this work can start inside the facilities and make life a lot easier for a lot of people. Did you see, Kim, in the Springfield Correctional Facility here, they just opened a little coffee shop run by inmates to serve other inmates. And it's just to teach business skills and things like that. I thought that was really interesting.
I hadn't heard that.
And it's a very progressive way of thinking. So we're evolving. We're not there yet, but I think we're starting to value the correct things. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the range of cost for keeping someone incarcerated, a year, Especially, we've moved away from incarcerating people because of just drug use, but it's just amazing that we can't come up with a better solution, some different system. But part of I was at a conference once and they were talking about the size of the U.S. and our funding streams and that type of thing. And these small countries have like this perfect opportunity to kind of test these things. But I feel like after a while that becomes an excuse. We should be looking. And I think in Vermont that's happening. But I still feel like we're held back, but it's not working.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the federal and state systems. We're just very ingrained in the way we've always done things. It's going to take years to unravel it. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation.
Well, Vermont is progressive. I've, like with the volunteers, and I've never seen, and I've been in a lot of states, and I've never seen people so dedicated and sincere and genuine.
Yeah, I agree with what Rich. I think it's very inspiring to see the work that's being done here.
Yeah, we use this saying that volunteers, just by stepping through the doors at Dismas House, there's a way that they're saying or demonstrating, I care enough about you to be in relationship with you for a part of my day. And I think during COVID, we had a lot of people dropping off meals, and that was a real absence. There's a way that the cooks become like the extended family. And I remember years ago, a woman who lived at Buell Street, she almost didn't speak all day to anyone. And, there was a lot of trauma in her life. And that night happened to be some volunteers. And one of the women was almost 90. And for the, first time I heard, I saw her over there speaking very quietly. And, later she sort of came out of her shell more, but she said, she lived with her grandmother her whole life. And, you could tell. So there will be different volunteers that, it could be Rotary members who end up striking up a conversation with someone who's always wanted to have their own business. So, but I think just that acceptance is huge. During COVID, that was kind of absent. We still had folks who were dropping off meals. I always valued it, but I only saw when it was gone. And there wasn't that relationship, sort of how different it was.
Yeah, I mean, the food's only actually a very small part of it. It's the community coming
sharing
in.
Your time, these days, family, you hardly have time for your own family, to come home and cook dinner, and they take the time away from their own family and their own schedules, and they make time for us. And I think that's amazing just in itself.
Yeah, it must be a pretty different message than many years ago we did a Dismas video. And we really followed the stream of thought of one of the characters in it. And he was saying something like, I come to what looks like a regular house. There aren't signs at Dismas House because we feel like it's people's homes, so we don't put a big sign out front. And he said, I feel like I come to a regular house in a regular neighborhood, but I'm not a regular person. And I think, every day the volunteers kind of in the house and sharing meals with them, you start to feel like a regular person.
I agree. Totally.
All right. So as we were starting to wrap things up, there's something that I wanted to talk about. It's, Kim, you have retirement coming up within 2 years?
Year and a half.
Year and a half.
Yep.
What are your emotions and feelings going into that? And after, where do you hope Dismas will go after Kim?
I can't believe that I stayed here this long, but it really became a calling. I mentioned that, there definitely, substance abuse has impacted my family. I think my father was an incredible role model. And back then, growing up in a small town in Vermont, you didn't volunteer. There weren't agencies that you volunteered with, but you were clearing your neighbor's roof because her husband had died and the snow was going to cave it in, or you were helping milk someone's cows because they broke their arm, or, he constantly was kind of doing that. And I think when sort of the combination of working with refugees and then coming to Dismas House, there just was something so pure and simple that I saw was lacking in a lot of our lives, families that got too busy, but there was something so fundamental that could be so healing to people that, I felt like the luckiest person alive to get to eat dinner every night with folks. I think, the thought of retirement is, I would imagine I will still get involved in other things. I think the way that Dismas is very grassroots. And I remember we were speaking in front of the Senate one time, and there were 3 agencies. They introduced one, and then they introduced Dismas, and they said, now, Dismas is a real grassroots organization. And I never really thought, so what's the big deal about that? And then over the years, I've come to see that, there wasn't just money available. And so this organization from someplace else kind of started one in Dismas House or in Vermont because there was money available, but rather a group of people who were volunteering kind of saw this need, Rita McCaffrey, Frank McCaffrey, and this group of people with them. There's no sort of greater way to address a need in your own community than the community responding, as opposed to, okay, there's a chunk of federal money or state money, and throw it at the problem, hire staff, and fix it. I think it's so much more powerful when it comes from within, because your community is taking a responsibility. They see this need and they want to fill it. So there's a way that we grew from that where there's an incredible amount of ownership. And I know Jeff and I have talked about this, how do you sort of stay efficient and because there's a business side to Dismas, but still really have it continue to be grassroots. And we all came up, and we use it a lot, the magic sauce term. What is the magic sauce about Dismas? Magic sauce. And I hope that the pieces that you've talked about, Rich, and you've talked about, Marie, can continue. And it's not, checking in, checking out, getting good time so you get to leave the house and those things. When you're dealing with big numbers, I think there's always the urge to come up with systems to manage people. And I hope that doesn't change, that Dismas is able to continue. I know, there are other efficiencies and things that we need to do. So I hope we can grow, but without, sacrificing any of sort of the basic, human being to human being, makes the greatest change rather than, coming up with more protocols and lists and that type of thing. And I'm sure that's a struggle of a lot of small nonprofits. But for some reason, Dismas has attracted some amazing people, and I've just felt incredibly fortunate to be here.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I see myself volunteering again. I have never not worked, and hopefully in the woods on my horse.
Marie, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I'm not quite sure. Probably back home in Belgium, working as a social worker, but I guess I will still feel that the world is calling me, so I'll probably be traveling a bit more, maybe working abroad. That's a possibility.
Would you stay in this field with people who are incarcerated or branch out to something else?
I've also worked with asylum seekers in Brussels, and I really enjoyed the type of experience. But I mean, Dismas and being a volunteer here has taught me a lot, and that's something I would like to keep doing for sure.
All right, Rich, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Probably still in the same career, furthering it. I would like to move down south and also be involved with some volunteer work.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Going to Dismas. If you want more information about Dismas of Vermont, visit our website, dismasofvt.org.
Thank you for listening to this Jam podcast. If you have found this program interesting and would like to find more Upper Valley content or learn how to produce your own media, please visit us at uvjam.org.